Managing diabetes is hard enough. Can you imagine navigating the treatment and the tech without vision? Close your eyes. Think about it. How accessible is diabetes technology for those who can't see? Welcome to Diabetech. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on here I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management with tech leaders, physicians, and those thriving with diabetes. Today's guest is most definitely thriving with diabetes and without vision. Joining me today is Veronica Elsea. She has been blind since birth and was diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 34 and has lived with diabetes for 36 years. She is part of the Accessible Insulin Pump Task Force and has spent much of her life advocating for more accessible tech. We spoke about her journey using the tech, how she uses it alongside her phone, and how she is working alongside manufacturers for better accessibility. If you are blind or have low vision yourself, let us know what your diabetes journey has looked like so far, and if there are any great tools that you use that others should check out. And Diabetech has a newsletter to stay up to date on all the latest in diabetes tech and news, and to hear about the latest Diabetech content releases. And we've got some giveaways. Be sure to subscribe with the link in the show notes. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or content on any of my pages is not medical advice and is for educational purposes only. Always consult with a physician before making changes to your healthcare. Veronica, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a very special topic. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time, and you had commented on one of my YouTube videos maybe a few months back, and I responded. I said, get in touch with me, and that led you on a little journey for how to get in touch with me, because I think I said Instagram.
You did.
But I'm so glad you got connected to me. We had a call. Your story's incredible, and what you're doing is great, so I'm excited to talk about it. Kind of tell us all a little bit about yourself.
I am currently a musician and composer, and my twin sister and I were born 2.5 months early and had too much oxygen in the incubator. So they're pretty sure we were blind before we ever went home from the hospital. So I have only known life as a totally blind person. So this is my normal. Fortunately, I had great parents who said, well, it's not what we wanted for you. Here's your kick in the butt. Go make something of it. So I began following my mother's advice and advocating for myself and starting to play in orchestras and do things that blind people weren't supposed to do and having a great time at it. At the age of 34, after a serious accident, I was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. Much to my surprise, because there wasn't any in my family. And at that time, lying there in the hospital is when I began to realize just how inaccessible diabetes management was to people like me. So I was fortunate to have a husband that would read stuff to me and read manuals and all kinds of things. So I learned about what everybody else was getting, and I said, I want it too. Fortunately, having had a lifetime of learning to advocate for myself, thank you, Mom, I started pounding on doors, making phone calls. I went through 10 different endocrinologists, and that began my process of advocating for accessible insulin pumps. I did not do well on multiple daily injections. My A1C was horrible. I went on my first insulin pump in 1991, which was a Desatronic, and that was a great little pump because it didn't have a whole lot of extra features. I was pretty even, and I stayed with that one until 2005. I went on the Cosmo. I loved that pump. Oh, I swore they were going to bury me with that Cosmo because one of the things about it was that it came with a computer program. And I know I'm dating myself. It was a program. And what you could do is go in this program and enter everything you wanted. Changes in basal rates, changes in your insulin to carb ratio, and just everything you could do in the pump, you could play with on the computer.
Would you say that that type of technology was more accessible than kind of what we have today?
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
And unfortunately, with the Cosmo was the only pump that did it. Everybody else had programs that allowed you to go from the pump onto the computer. But the Cosmo was the only one that let you go from the computer to the pump. And when I would talk to the other companies, they're like, oh, no, we can't do that. And I couldn't even get them to have different alarm sounds for different things. Everything sounded the same. So we had to kind of learn, okay, if this happened now, my best guess is fill in the blank. And I still do that a little bit with my Omnipod. But that Cosmo was great. And I got the very last one when Smith's Medical went out of business because I cried on the phone. I'm really good at that. Like I said, self-advocacy. And I started getting in touch over the years with other blind people who were having the same frustrations. And most of the other pumps, the only thing you could do by yourself was maybe fill a cartridge and deliver a bolus. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I want to make use of insulin on board and all of the new things that were coming out. And I was never content to just do that. After I finally had to say goodbye to the Cosmo, I spent 1 year with the Animus, and I really didn't like it because when we're counting button pushes, it was so easy for the Animus to jump. So you'd think you'd go 1, 2, 3. You may have gone 10. So I couldn't trust what number I was landing on. So finally in 2018, I decided really the only pump that had any chance of accessibility was the Omnipod. So I've been on the Omnipod Classic since 2018. I'm waiting for the iOS app to come out for the Omnipod 5 because I give myself the same privileges that everybody else gets, namely, I want to be lazy. I don't want to go buy an Android phone because then I got to learn another screen reader and its swipes are all different than VoiceOver on an iPhone. And I just didn't want to do that.
The technology for phones and the accessibility there is incredible. Apple, Google, all of these companies have worked so hard to make these devices more accessible to people for all different reasons.
Yes.
What about the diabetes industry? You've kind of gone around this, but what would you say is the current state we are in, a broad understanding of the technology today and its accessibility for people with vision issues or blindness?
The broad understanding is that right now, within the last couple of years, we have more hope than we ever have. Because since we have created our accessible insulin pump task force, which is a small group of consumers that are longtime pump users, we have managed to make contact with people in several of the different manufacturers. And by golly, they're actually listening to us. And especially now that so many devices are starting to be controlled by a smartphone, that's our big in because the smartphone already has the speech built in. And so when you think about it, 10 years ago, here's my remote for my Omnipod. And if I wanted that to be accessible, I'd have to say to the company, can you please make this talk? And they'd have to build in a whole system of speaking and responding to button presses. And that's a tall order for most of these companies because their thinking was, we are such a small group. And technology is getting better, so we're not going to see so many diabetics with retinopathy. And we are still finding ourselves explaining there's a lot more causes of blindness than just diabetes, especially as your population ages. But now the manufacturers don't have to do a whole lot more than make the smartphone work according to how Apple expects it to work. how Android expects it to work, and then the smartphone will talk to us.
Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. With this task force, what is your involvement in it, and what are the goals?
Yeah, I'm currently serving as chair, which is really kind of the administrative responsibility of setting up meetings and that kind of thing. And what we are doing is we've actually signed non-disclosure agreements with several of the manufacturers. We are having regular meetings with different members of their staff. And a lot of what we spent our time doing in the beginning was finding people at the companies. That was hard. And because you know how it is, more people are on the internet, so consequently they've made themselves more inaccessible on the internet. You can't find them. So we worked very hard to find our contacts. And now we set up regular meetings. We ask questions. Sometimes if a pump has already been released, we say, okay, we found this problem. We're having discussions about really how to rewrite this story in the future. Our goals are, of course, insulin pumps that people who are blind or low vision can use independently and safely. The other goal is to be included in the early testing. So get included when they look for those first focus groups so that we can offer opinions and feedback at a time when they can actually respond to it. Because that's been the hardest thing, is that once the pump is out, there may be something we find, but of course it's too late.
Are there government regulations, like we have the ADA, we have the FDA? Are there regulations for operability or accessibility for the blind?
Currently,
Or
no.
low vision?
No.
Interesting.
Not for medical devices. That's not covered by the ADA.
Okay.
Now, there are two bills that are right now in Congress, one in the House, one in the Senate. It's called the Non-Visual Accessible Medical Device Act. And what these bills will purport to do is set up a system for defining what does accessible mean. And then once the system is all in place and the rule making and you know how all these agencies work, once that's done, there will be a system of requirements for all of these manufacturers. And this would include CPAP, all kinds of things, not just diabetes management gear. So what we're telling our insulin pump manufacturers is, come on, let's beat these bills. Let's get it done now and work with us while it's fun and friendly.
Exactly. And maybe they'll save money because, you know, they don't have to all of a sudden last minute, you know, follow this bill and rework this entire thing that could have been done, you know, maybe in the earlier period. You said you're working with pump companies, you're speaking with them. Are any of these companies already addressing this on their own? Do they have departments devoted to accessibility? What do you know about that area?
They do somewhat. Dexcom really does. Okay. Dexcom has been great. And in fact, we told them that with the G6, originally the timeout for the camera when you were scanning the QR code was way too short for us. And by golly, they just lengthened that timeout. And it is so easy with the G7 to scan the QR code and get that sensor and transmitter. It's really great. So So yes, some of them do. Some of them are beginning to. Some of them have a few people that are kind of specializing in it. It's something that is really being worked on. I do think they take us very seriously. It's just that things, of course, move more slowly than we want, because I want it yesterday.
Yeah. Well, we're all part of the diabetes community, which is already this, marginalized group. And then you're part of this other group, this niche within a niche. Everyone, as people with diabetes, as people who are building devices for people with diabetes, we should understand that these communities need to be served. They need to be able to use it and gain from it, and be able to treat themselves. What has been the response from these companies you're speaking to?
Most of them, it's been great. They have been so welcoming, and the discussions have been so respectful. There are some that are a little harder to get a hold of than others, but they have been really profitable. We're already beginning to see some results from some of them. We've had many discussions that did kind of go, okay, next update. We're prioritizing, we're working on what things. And I think what's happening is the more we talk to them and the more exposure their product teams have to our needs, then the easier it gets, especially with the future pumps that aren't out yet. The other thing that I really want to stress here for everyone, if you think, oh, that group doesn't really pertain to me, one of the really important reasons to make these pumps accessible is that if you're using, let's say you're using that Tandem Mobi right now, and you're having a great time with it, and your diabetes is in control, and you're feeling really good, should something happen to your vision down the road, you don't have to go, oh Lord, blind people are using pump X and I can no longer use my Mobi. Okay, it's really going to be true if you're using the first Tandem, which is all touchscreen and no smartphone. If you lose your vision suddenly, now you got to change pumps. And so if you get glaucoma or macular degeneration, or if something happens with retinopathy and you've got that Mobi, you just turn the speech on your smartphone, which you're going to do anyway, because that's how you're going to do everything else in your life.
Absolutely. And we're already seeing great advancements in this technology, like with Mobi, the fact that there is an onboard bolus button or connected apps that can control the Mobi or the Omnipod iPhone app. You've got the CGM apps, all things like that. You mentioned earlier that one of your early on pumps that it didn't have different sounds. And the nice thing about now is these apps, these programs have different sounds that go to different, you can assign sounds like with Dexcom to different
I do
alerts.
that on my Dexcom.
And it's funny because I've never thought about it in a way where, oh wow, if I didn't have my vision, this would be very helpful. And I already find myself saying, like, mentally just knowing what an alert is, because I hear the da-na-na-na, I'm like, oh, that's bad. So, but maybe besides that, are there any other things that these companies have implemented or are doing that are in that right direction or have really helped on your tech journey and using the devices?
Well, there are three things that they're doing. One of the more important things that, a lot of them hadn't thought of is how they handle tech support. Okay, so if I have a question, even with my Omnipod Classic, I can now call up the company and get somebody who can walk me through and say, okay, press the down arrow 3 times and give me a description that will allow me to solve the problem with them. And just the training. In Dexcom, they have an entire training department that has had some work with voiceover that understands how blind people are using the Dexcom and can help us out. So that is a really big issue, is just the training. And that's going through for people who get on the pump for the first time. or start the device. So we're working on just the manuals on the websites and all of those external things that you have to have when you've got the pump, because you got to go on the website and set up an account and do all those extra things. In terms of what many of them are doing, some of the improvements have kind of happened accidentally, if you will. And all of a sudden, oh, this app does work great. I mean, there are so many things about that little Mobi app that we can now do independently already. You know, there's just a couple of little things. Choosing whether you want to use a G6 or a G7. And with the Omnipod, I know several totally blind people that are, in fact, using the Android app. It's a little squirrely, but we're pretty good at understanding squirrely apps and finding workarounds and longing for the day when we don't have to find some workarounds. But there are little things that happen just in updates that may seem itty-bitty but make a big difference. So, you know, when that one little icon gets changed, that you guys probably won't even notice because you can already choose between your G6 and G7 sensor. But if they change that funny little icon to something that the phone can recognize with voiceover, we get complete independence. Bing!
You know, industry is listening to my podcast. There are people potentially at these companies that are listening right now. What is your message to them?
The big message to industry is that we are not a major liability. We have been taught how to function, how to live with little or no vision. We are very careful. So I have to be careful when I pick up this PDM that if I suddenly have to bolus because one of my pods died and I have a blood sugar that is 320, I have to sit here starting at 80 and count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up to 320. And that takes concentration. And then I use an app on my phone to check it. We have had to learn all of our lives to be extra careful. We aren't going to just willy-nilly give ourselves extra insulin and kill ourselves because we want to succeed. And that is what has been slowing things down and holding us back, this sense that we are an extra risk, that we are an extra liability. We just have to work a little differently. That's the big message.
Yeah, and you all deserve to be independent humans and given the tools to allow to be when it's possible. You mentioned you have a partner, but I'm single. And I know there's other people who have low vision that are single too.
Yeah, I used to love to shock the companies. I mean, I'm 70, he's a few years older than me, and when these companies, oh good, we'll let you have a pump because you have a sighted spouse, and I say, what if he dies? Do I have to give my pump back? No. So that was one of the things we got done back in the 90s, is dropping that requirement. Now, I can understand
that was a requirement.
Yeah, it was. In the early 90s, they kept saying, no, we can't do it. Yes, you can. And we were successful there. Now, what I'm telling them now is if we participate in beta testing, where things might not work, that's a perfectly reasonable requirement to have a working pair of eyeballs in your house. So it makes total sense for beta testing. But you never know when something could happen to someone.
Veronica, I mean, you're so strong. I can hear it. It sounds like your upbringing allowed for that. And perhaps because of the way you were born, it's helped promote you to be even stronger. I mean, we call people with diabetes warriors because it takes so much willpower and strength to live with the disease. I kind of want to go back to when you were diagnosed. And in that moment, dang, I'm already blind. Are you kidding me? Now I have diabetes. Like, what was that moment like? Already had this long life of strength dealing with one thing. How did that kind of help you absorb this new lifestyle?
Well, I let myself go through all of the grief process. When it first happened, because I was coming, back from this major injury where I lost the use of my hands for a while. And it's like, oh, great. The first thing I have to learn how to do is diabetes. And what was really bizarre is that when I was in the hospital, because I was blind, they assumed I was an out-of-control diabetic, so nobody told me that my blood sugar numbers were up. So I had no idea. Ultimately, some heads rolled at that hospital. By the time I figured it out or discovered it, I had a whole weekend I didn't remember. And I just remember thinking, wow, I've known some people who had diabetes that were in some of my guide dog school classes. Now I have to admit, and I kind of didn't want to tell anybody or admit it. And I was trying to look at different things. And the hospital was horrible. They didn't even let me try an injection in the hospital. So the first time I did it, I was just at home. And I thought, my hands were shaking so bad. I thought, God, I hope I get this stuff in here. And I remember just sobbing, going, I don't want to have to figure out another thing, how to live. Why didn't somebody figure this out ahead of me? And that really stopped me for probably a good month or two. And at that time, I was beginning to learn about, exchanges and carbs and things. And we didn't have all the fancy things that we have now that'll allow us to read the labels on the boxes. So I really had to rely on other people. And ultimately, I reacted like I do to everything else. I cried and wallowed, and I actually threw myself a pity party, complete with violins and flowers and the whole bit. And then finally, one day, I just went, okay, I'm tired of this. Here's your kick in the butt, go do something. And then I just stand up and kind of get mad and go do it. So I started trying things out. Oh, that didn't work. Trying things out. And I mean, even, let me know if I aim this right. Okay, when I change my pod, that's when you can really get messed up by your PDM timing out. And you can hit a button that discards your pod instead of next if you're not paying attention. So that's when I use the app on my phone. So my husband made this stand for me that I put my phone on top of, and I set the PDM on the table so that the camera looks down on it, and I can actually almost have a talking pump, because every time the text on the PDM changes, the program on my phone, the app on my phone, will read what it says. So I almost have a talking pump when I'm changing that. But it was cool because we imagined it and we made it. We made a little gizmo that helps me hold. There is where the syringe goes and the insulin goes here, and it helps me hold it straight and allows me to pull it out and know how much insulin I'm putting into my pod, so that I don't always have to fill my pod completely. I can say I only want 150 this week because I know I'm going to have to change it in 2 days instead of 3. And so that ability to design things and build things and try things. My husband did a talking box for my freestyle blood glucose meter, which is my backup, because the only talking meter was a Prodigy, and I thought it was garbage. My numbers were 150 points off. And I'm like, no, I want the good stuff. So we made a talking box. So,
what's a talking box?
My husband he works in electronic music, And so we just got the commands from the people that owned the Freestyle meter at that time. It was TheraSense. And we got the list of commands and put them and used an Arduino board. And by golly, we made a talking box. Looks very homemade, kind of big, but
Amazing.
It has a serial connection. I plug my meter into it, and everything I do on the meter talks.
That's so cool.
And I have, in fact, being a musician, I've got my own recording studio, and we have the same thing there. He wrote the software that makes everything so I can control my own mixing console, all my synthesizers, everything
Wow.
I do. So
what a cool duo.
Oh,
I love that.
I married well,
That's
I'll
so
tell
great.
you.
Yeah. You brought this up a few times today about advocating for yourself. I mean, that's what you've been doing, and that's important for everyone, especially with diabetes. You are the person that's going to care the most about your diabetes. What is your advice to others listening about whether it's their diabetes or something else, and why they should advocate for themselves or why they need to?
Because nobody is going to care about your needs as much as you are. And the other thing to remember is that if you have a particular issue, a particular problem, a particular success, you're probably not the only one. So if you have the gumption to speak up, you are helping somebody who doesn't, who is still too scared. And it's okay to have phases when you feel like you're too scared. And for me, the most important thing about advocating for yourself is being real. I mean, I'm not kidding you when I say, when I was so afraid of the Cosmo going away, I worked my way up to the company president and I cried on every single phone call. And by the time I got to the top of it, I don't know how I can live without your pump. I mean, I was just real because I was terrified. And people understand there's a person at the other end of the line. You have a story, and your story has value. Use your story in advocating and saying, here's what this would give me. Here's what I'm missing. You know, go to that doctor and say, you say things so quickly, and when I leave here, I feel like I don't have anything. Help me find what I'm missing. That's how you get somewhere.
Absolutely. What do you see in innovations that are coming out now, especially with AI? What excites you about what we could be seeing or what you're already seeing within your community? Any technologies that you see will really help you and this community use all facets of technology, but even especially diabetes technology?
What we're talking is access to more information. And I'll give you an example. With Dexcom, okay, I'm going to go into my Dexcom.
Messages. Dexcom G7. Dexcom G7 image. Dexcom.
Okay, I'm going to put my finger up here at the phone.
You're 132 milligrams per deciliter and steady. 132.
Okay, now I'm going to continue to swipe.
Selected. 3 hours. Button. 6 button. 12 button. 24 button.
Okay, so you hear it saying 3 button, 6 button, 12 button. That's the graph. And with speech, we do not have access to that graph. So I know my current reading, but what do I do if I want to know what happened at 2 in the morning and how come I woke up high? What's happening already is people have discovered that there is one service that people subscribe to that now has an AI component. And if they take a screenshot of this Dexcom screen, they can then feed it to that AI and start asking questions. And you can actually say to AI, hey, what was my blood sugar at 2 o'clock this morning? And you can get more detailed information from that graph because AI is looking at the graph and interpreting the graph. And that is going to lead to more access even within the programs themselves. But right now, people are doing that and using the AI to be able to snoop around, and therefore that translates directly into better understanding of how things are affecting us. And I can go change my basal because I'm always going up between 12 and 2, so I can change my basal rate.
It is incredible what is happening with AI right now, and it's exploding. I used ChatGPT today to, put in a research paper and asked it to tell me what it was about in a few paragraphs. But the idea of throwing in your CGM readings over the last few weeks, putting it into there and asking the AI for what were the trends that were happening to explain to me. It doesn't need to give me treatment. It could just tell me what was happening in a well understood way.
Right.
And
because
with
that's
your
been
iPhone,
what we're missing.
Yeah, and with Apple bringing AI to their iPhones this fall, and Google with Gemini, and Samsung with their own, all of our machines will begin to have this artificial intelligence that can help guide us and understand the knowledge that's already out there, our information that we can use. It's very exciting. This is a whole other conversation about the future of AI with diabetes technology, which I would love to have on this channel for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And what happens now is that we have 2 consumer organizations for the blind here in the U.S., and then there's one in Canada. And we have email lists that people can sign up to. And so somebody just playing around figured this thing out with AI and the Dexcom and put it on the list. And then, 6 other people try it and go, hey, it worked. And well, I had this issue. And so we are all helping each other. So somebody goes on and, hey, I'm actually using the Mobi, or hey, or we'll tell them, hey, go try it now. It's just about there. And anybody know if the iOS app for the Omnipod is out yet? No, I don't think so, not yet. And, there are some things we share with the list, some things we don't, depending on what, we're allowed to say at this point from the manufacturers. But so we are still kind of playing with the toys and making all these cool accidental discoveries and sharing them with each other. And that's how all successful movements really get started.
How can people get involved in this movement if they feel inspired to?
People can contact either the American Council of the Blind or the National Federation of the Blind. They both have diabetes divisions that anyone can either become a member or find the name of the list to subscribe to if you want to follow a list. They can certainly make contact with our accessible insulin pump task force. Usually that goes through me, Veronica Elsea, and you can find me at veronica@laurelcreekmusic.com. The Laurel part is Laurel. I will certainly respond to any emails, and I'd be happy to help direct anyone where appropriate or match what you're interested in. These email lists are really good for anyone who is already blind and newly diagnosed with diabetes, someone who has been living with diabetes a long time and now having vision problems, and can help people go, oh Lord, how do I get a finger stick done? How do I know when to take the strip over and get the blood on the strip? That's been our nemesis for years. So, anybody wants to help me make Medicare give all blind people a CGM, just let me know.
Right. Veronica, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was such an interesting side of diabetes that luckily I don't have to think about often, but it's so important that we're aware of it and that we do things. So I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to educate everyone and just acquaint us with and just get to feel comfortable. I may be different than you. I see the world differently than you, but I'm just like you.
I've got to say, I'm a bit surprised by the lack of regulation for accessibility with medical devices for the low vision and blind community. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comments on YouTube. And don't forget, sign up for our newsletter with the link in the show notes for future giveaways and diabetes tech news. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.